We often claim that Pokemon are loved and cared for, but what if I told you there are multiple that we ruin the lives of throughout history? Hydreigon, unfairly forced into solitude deep within caves by older generations. Absol, considered a bringer of doom and attacked whenever it appeared. And of course, the complete extinction of Zorua within Hisui, resulting in a new vengeful spirit being born. Many Pokemon would not exist without humanity ruining their lives, and now it's time that I reveal the many lives of Pokemon that humanity has ruined. Howdy there, I'm Krillic, connecting the world through Pokemon. While there are many Pokemon that have been helped within their world, lives benefited, and even Pokemon that have been saved thanks to their connection to humanity, today we're digging into the darker tales where Pokemon have had their lives changed for the worst. Some worse than others, and today we'll be talking about their stories to see who really got the worst of it all. The first victim on our list is Porygon Z. After humanity was able to make Porygon in the first place, they wanted it to be able to do more. It already didn't need food, water, or air, all while being able to travel between the real world and cyberspace, but they wanted it to be able to travel to real space. They were able to succeed to some degree, because they were able to upgrade it into becoming Porygon 2. A Pokemon that couldn't fly, but could otherwise accomplish just about any other goal that they had in mind. But this still wasn't enough, and more needed to be done to allow it to travel to space all on its own. What reason could it have to do this, you might ask? Well, we don't really know, because Silph Co. was the first place to make Porygon, and they were the primary developer for the Pokeballs and other leading technology within Kanto and Johto. Sure, we could assume Porygon was great for making sure Pokemon were safe in the digital world of Pokeballs, but what about discovering Pokemon outside of the planet or even our solar system? Yet again, this wasn't enough, and someone unnamed had developed what is currently called the Dubious Disc. This disc wasn't supposed to result in tragedy, it was supposed to allow Porygon to evolve further to be able to travel between different alien dimensions. But unfortunately, it resulted in this mess of a Pokemon, Porygon Z. Now it's erratic, unstable, and it's overall considered a failure. So much so that people question whether or not it should be considered a true evolution of Porygon or something else entirely. But it's never been noted to be in pain at all. Despite its many different irregular and erratic movements, it might not be a failure like we believe that it is. I actually personally strongly believe that Porygon Z is actually a success to a degree. Its eyes changing in its evolution, its disjointed movements, the increase to its power, they might actually be the sign that Porygon Z may not be as much of a failure as much it is an actual success that we can't perceive properly. It might actually be able to see into other planes of existence with those eyes, alien dimensions if you would, and travel between them, or might be stuck partially between them, but can't fully enter them or separate realities from each other. It might literally be viewing multiple dimensions at the same time. Unfortunately, this still means that it isn't 100% here and changes nothing about its unstable nature, but its glitchy, twitchy nature is simply all it can do while we try to gain control over it, and it tries to process what might be hundreds or thousands of alien dimensions at once. To put into perspective what its base power is, while base stat totals aren't the be-all end-all in Pokemon, it does have the same amount or base stats as Swampert, Magnezone, and Annihilate. And in terms of it being able to withstand alien worlds and alien Pokemon attacking it, this Pokemon has access to Conversion and Conversion 2. The first one allows it to change into the typings of the target Pokemon. So if it's a water type, then Porygon can become a water type. Conversion 2 allows it to randomly become any type that would resist the damage it had just received. If it gets hit by a fire type move, then it might become a water type. It was genuinely built to explore and withstand many environments. And when we failed to upgrade it in ways we saw as successful, we just threw it away. And it's been 20 years since it was first introduced within Sinnoh, and there still hasn't been any additional upgrades, split evolutions, nothing. It was even left behind, but in an alternate reality within Pokemon Masters, we can even see what could have been. Instead of having a Rotom phone, we could have gotten the Pory phone. Maybe something might change in the future, but for now, Porygon has really become a forcibly forgotten relic of the past for the most part. I do also want to note that there's a very high chance that someone from Team Galactic had actually created the Dubious Disc and had failed, quote unquote, as we've been talking about.
The reason why I say this is that it conveniently appears, or rather the dubious disc appears in places where other people can't reach it, or Team Galactic would have access to, literally being their own HQ. And as such, it would be all too convenient to have a Pokemon capable of existing or traveling to alternate alien dimensions when Cyrus himself is trying to create a whole new world, a whole new universe where there is no human spirit to ruin the world as he sees it. So maybe just the right scientist has to get their hands on Porygon 2 and something new could be created. In a catch-all category, we have villainous Pokemon. This would include Zubat, Rattata, Coughing, Grimer, Houndour, Poochyena, really any Pokemon that have been forced into serving under villainous teams. In some cases, we just find Team Rocket catching and using any Pokemon they could get their hands on, but in cases like Poochyena and Houndour, I'd argue their lives were definitely ruined, maybe not every single one within their species, but especially once they evolve into Mightyena and Houndoom, under these villainous teams does it get bad. Because once they do evolve into these forms, they become incredibly loyal to their trainer, only listening to them and nobody else whatsoever. These Pokemon just don't know any better and can't return back to their families in the wild, or they just believe that the way that they're being treated is the correct way, a very abusive towards Pokemon way, which is just sad. This is ultimately just a shorter entry that I wanted to add in here because it isn't as strong or as specific a story as the rest of our entries today, but it's at least worth noting, especially as not every single Pokemon belonging to a villain isn't actually treated badly. For example, Cyrus having a Crobat on his team shows that there's friendship between them, a genuine friendship at the very least. And when we look at the villains in the movies, their Pokemon usually rehabilitate alongside them or separate from them to live in the wild or with new trainers, so there's always a chance of hope for these abused Pokemon. Banette is a very strange Pokemon. In fact, many of our ghost types are, since they can hatch from eggs. Although as we know it, Pokemon eggs are less of a traditional egg and more of a container that Pokemon create after their babies are born, which isn't too different from real life, technically speaking. The yolk you eat is meant to be for the embryo, its first nutrients as it eats them up and then grows rather quickly. But if there's no embryo, well, then there's nobody there to eat up those nutrients, so we eat it or other creatures eat it. But I digress. Banette has two methods of being quote-unquote born. In one way, its previous form Shuppet will continuously absorb negative emotions from others until it then gains enough power to evolve. We might just level it up at 37 mechanically, but without fighting, it just needs to intake all this negative energy instead. This is why Banette is driven by a powerful grudge and keeps its mouth closed to ensure no energy escapes it. The powerful grudge is actually a collection of grudges from everybody that it absorbed those negative emotions from. But the second way that it comes into existence is by completely skipping the Shuppet form and instead is born from a plush doll that was thrown away, abandoned by its previous owner. Now it is fueled by a different deep grudge as it aims to find the one that threw it away. In other words, the literal negative emotions of anger or sadness fuel its existence, and a doll that is left behind and feels abandoned turns into this, effectively saying that it is completely our fault that it exists in the first place. And this ties into a much greater concept behind yokai, where dependent on how you treat your items, then in 100 years or 50 years or some indeterminate amount of time, all of those emotions will actually blend into that item and it will come to life as a yokai. Maybe it'll be benevolent, maybe it'll be evil. It is all dependent on how you respected your items. But it's not all bad here. There's an entire episode actually dedicated to a Nurse Joy who left her doll behind and it transformed into a Banette who deeply loved her. And once they reunited and she was happy to see it, it continued to live on as a happy Banette, becoming her assistant as you would see in a Chansey or an Audino instead, all because Nurse Joy didn't mean to leave that toy behind and then grew closer with it now that they were reunited. Of course, in other stories, there may not be as happy of a reunion, allowing the Banette to then live on with an ever greater grudge, seeking revenge on its past owner, potentially for the rest of its immortal life, assuming that that person isn't already gone. A classic Pokemon that we know has long been misunderstood by humanity, Absol, the Omen Pokemon. They live in the mountains far from civilization usually, and it rarely ventures down from its alpine home. Using its horn, it's able to actually sense even subtle changes in the sky and the land to predict when a disaster will occur, and will try to warn people when one is approaching. It's also known to protect fields from natural disasters, and this often has the unfortunate effect of it being blamed for the disaster, notably by the elderly. The hatred for it began years ago because of superstitions surrounding it. Despite this, others are still interested in its ability to predict disaster. Kind of brings into a lot of different ideas, whether it be catfish being thought to bring in earthquakes, or even the oarfish, which is what Melodic is actually inspired by, then causing these great tsunamis to occur, but of course none of that actually is the truth. This, in turn, shows us how Absol has often been referred to as a bringer of doom, rather than a warning of it, because we've done that in real life. In addition to its divination powers though, its horn can also be used as a sword-like appendage in battle. It possesses great agility, it's described by some as moving swiftly as the wind, and it has said to have a lifespan of up to 100 years. And in the sleep decks, the powers of its horn remains active even while it sleeps. Due to this, it can strongly detect danger even when it's not awake. So it could then wake up if, let's say, an earthquake is on its way or a great rampaging legendary is on its way, and put everyone away to safety. What I love most about this is that Absol is used in the games to warn us of oncoming doom as well. On Hoenn's Route 120 we find it, which is the same place that connects to the ancient tomb where we find Registeel. It's at the summit of Mount Coronet, the same place of course where we reach the climax of Team Galactic's story and watch the binding of Dialga and Palkia happen with the red chain. In Heart and Soul Silver, if you play the Sounds of Hoenn, you will see it in a number of different places. Slowpoke Well for when Team Rocket attacked, Union Cave for the mysterious and dangerous power of the unknown, Mount Mortar and Dark Cave due to the number of people that get lost inside of them, the Whirl Islands because that's where Lugia slumbers, the caves of Mount Silver as Red sits atop the mountain waiting for our challenge, and even our Pokemon can anticipate Red's just power sitting up there, and the list goes just on and on, to even include the area just outside of the giant chasm that Kyurem stays inside of. Even in Legend ZA, the first rogue Mega Pokemon we fight is Absol, and to follow that, the first Mega Rogue we fight in the DLC is Mega Absol Z, showing us that it is usually first on the scene, and unfortunately, at least in this case, it got caught in the crossfire, absorbing energy that it couldn't control. But what if something else had absorbed that energy? What other Pokemon would have been in pain and been unable to control itself? What other humans could have been put into danger? What other Pokemon could have been put into danger? And, at least in this case, it seems as though Absol could at least contain that energy until it could be stopped. One of the best instances, honestly, of it being shown why people thought Absol is the problem is in the Jirachi Wishmaker movie. Absol just creepily stands within a reflective mirror, seeming like a reflection of Max at first, before it breaks free and attacks everyone. It doesn't communicate, it just attacks as it tries to reach the person it knows is the major antagonist. A warning for us even as the audience to say, hey, this magician guy really isn't that good of a person, watch out. And of course, that individual does just trap the Absol so it's out of the way without any further issues for himself. Mind you, this Pokemon does not like to fight unless it absolutely has to, no pun intended, and it even hates Mega Evolving. It can fight, but instead uses its new form as an intimidation tactic, using this aura to oppress anyone that had any fighting spirit in them with the hopes that this will be enough to avoid a direct fight. It even changes the shape of its fur to look like wings, almost making it look like an angel of death, if you would. It does make me wonder though what happens in the greater lore of things for those that have an Absol as one of their Pokemon. Do they just refuse to fight more often? Do they hate their lives if they're constantly forced to Mega Evolve? I'd like to at least imagine that they don't, especially if the Absol is raised from a young age, which would be a dope little story. A young Absol raised alongside a newborn child to help keep it safe, and so it just stops the baby from opening the cabinet under the kitchen sink, or stops the baby from falling off of high places where it could seriously get hurt. The list kind of goes on and on. Alternatively though, when it does evolve into Mega Absol Z, it no longer cares about being passive or peaceful from the get-go. Now it wants to end things as soon as possible before things get worse. This is supported by its dex entry, which does state, using fur that it has made into sharp claw-like shapes, it cuts down foes with a single blow. This is an act of kindness to keep them from suffering. What's wild about this then is that throughout the Mega Dimension DLC, we are constantly hearing a voice that's begging for help, but telling us at the same time to stay away, to go away. And by the end of the story, we find out that everything in this DLC is caused by Darkrai, who is trying not to enter a rogue Mega state. This version of Absol then came in, knowing that there's no way to stop Darkrai without battling it. So it adapted and was ready to knock it out and put an end to the disaster before it happened, ready to strike a decisive blow. Unfortunately, it couldn't get close enough without going rogue itself. It's really unfortunate that Absol was seen as such a terrible Pokemon in lore for so long, but at least in the modern day, newer generations are seeing that it's a Pokemon warning us before disaster strikes, and it deserves far more love than it has ever gotten in the past. Before we move on to the very strange case of Spiritomb and one of the spirits of the 108 within it that we ruined the life of, I just want to say thank you for watching. If you're enjoying this so far, I guarantee you'll enjoy the rest and any other video on this channel, so make sure you're subscribed for weekly content. I also want to say thank you to the members of the channel. They make a massive difference as they ensure I can take the extra time to dive deep into these topics and make quality content for everyone. If you want early access to videos, behind the scenes info, and members exclusive content like this list here, become a member for as little as $3 a month. Lastly, let me know your favorite dark type Pokemon. Something you might notice as we go along is that many dark types end up being misunderstood and unfairly treated, resulting in what we see in the modern day. Not only do I love reading comments, but it also appeases the almighty algorithm alongside likes and hyping the video, so be sure to do that as it helps the channel greatly. But enough of all that, thank you once again, and on with the video. With Spiritomb, there's two ways we can view this. One is the funny way, I think, as Spiritomb is composed of 108 evil spirits that have been bound to the odd keystone, thus putting an end to their chaos and quote-unquote ruining their lives as they can't just go do whatever they want anymore. On the other hand, I've had a new theory thanks to one of these spirits known as Vesa. She sends us on the quest within Pokemon Legends Arceus to collect 107 spirits, and at the very end, she reveals that she is a spirit herself. Spiritomb is then unlocked, and we can catch it whenever we want at the giant fake odd keystone. But she says in multiple dialogue pieces that we spent plenty of time together and how it's fitting we see her as odd. Of course, reinforcing that she is one of the 108 spirits, and she has secretly been traveling with us the whole time within the odd keystone, or at least as a part of it. Now, it's important to note that if the spirits aren't all together, they get very anxious, it's said. But these spirits also like to cause chaos and even possess people to do their bidding, each spirit being able to possess a person all on their own. So then why would this one singular spirit, Vesa, go against the rest of what these spirits want and bring them all together when they all seem happy doing their own thing? Well, of course, Vesa is short for vessel, because she is the vessel spirit that binds them all to the odd keystone. Without Vesa, or even spirits exactly like Vesa, who serve to be the binder, the good-natured spirit amongst the 108 total evil spirits, then sealing them all away would be meaningless, and they would constantly be able to escape the keystone. What I'm insinuating then is that Vesa is a victim, even shown further through this TCG card that shows a very happy Spiritomb and a very upset-looking Vesa, her eyes glowing in the reflection, and it's such a cool card, honestly. It's almost as if she truly serves them, though, as a sacrifice for the greater good. But if you want to hear more in-depth info on this story and other tragedies in Pokemon, I actually have two videos all about those stories. Now, originally, Darkrai is just a misunderstood Pokemon that unfortunately can't control its powers all that well. But for at least a brief moment in time, I would argue we had the chance to completely ruin its life and even the lives of the entire world or multiverse of Pokemon completely. All thanks to AZ creating Anj in the first place, the effective bioweapon within Prism Tower, and it gathering an incredible amount of energy. Plenty of Pokemon then were attracted to the location for that energy. This included more than just Pokemon across Kalos, but even Pokemon from other regions, and that's how we landed with Darkrai being in Lumiose. The problem then is that while it seems as though normal Darkrai has a stronger hold on its powers, it still prefers to stay away from others as much as it can. This then made Prism Tower the perfect place to hide. After all, not a single human goes up there anymore without Clement and his gym not currently being active there, while it's quote-unquote under construction, which was just a lie to keep people away. As a side, it actually does make me wonder where and what everyone else who could have been in this game are doing, or is doing. Sure, we get little details for a good chunk of them, but there's so much more being kept strongly away from our eyes. It makes me wonder more and more if they were trying to detach us from their stories, as if to say, you can't follow them forever, look at what's in front of you now. Especially considering they made some very deliberate long ties to Corbeau and Lysander, or Corbeau and Giovanni, just for some small examples. Which, before we do get back on track with Darkrai, I swear that was just a lead up for Corbeau to be the Team Rocket leader in Pokopia, and then for Pokopia to be our future before Generation 10. I won't explain that here though. Again, I don't mean to overly plug, but I have a whole video dedicated to the story of Pokopia, some theories, and everything else going on there. But Darkrai, in its infinite wisdom, had decided to sit in Prism Tower where all of this energy was just coalescing. And when things went a little crazy with it, for some reason, it just didn't leave. Now, I've heard a lot of people say, and I think I've even said it, that the big final blast is what got Darkrai to reach its next evolution, but that is specifically never actually stated. It was really just the sheer amount of energy that did gather there at the tower, and Darkrai likely dipped the second that Tawny and Eternal Floette got to the top of the tower. Between the very beginning of the story, before we even got there even, and that moment, it was probably in there absorbing tons of energy and chilling out, not needing to eat the dreams of other people for energy, if that's what it does. It's kind of confusing sometimes, but by then, it was still already too late, and Darkrai absorbed too much. So of course, it Mega Evolves, and it manifests the subconscious of Lumiose. Its people, its Pokemon, everything's subconscious, and it did so against its own will, begging for help, but also begging for us to run away and leave it alone, all while being in pain. It's like a confused animal at that point. Of course, we'd stop its rogue stage, but it's wild to think that this event was a story over 3,000 years in the making. If humanity had never forcibly taken AZ's Floette from him, and he had never fired the ultimate weapon, but everything could have still been avoided even if he did all that, if Lysander hadn't mentally snapped and turned from the man who gives too much into the man who tried to take everything. And so, of course, that resulted in him uncovering the ultimate weapon in the modern day, and even trying to use Anj, but not having Eternal Floette with him to activate it, still firing the weapon, kickstarting years of energy absorption that finally built up to the event of Legend ZA and Mega Darkrai. Honestly, don't take this as like law, but everything connecting from Kalos might be some of the most cohesive and in-your-face the story gets, especially with ZA. But that's because, you know, some people do tend to miss details or completely ignore subtler hints, like the whole concept of Volo being immortal now, or at least him living to the modern age. But that's neither here nor there, I suppose. How about we move on to a Pokemon we completely destroyed the lives of on purpose? The tale of the Hisui and Zoroark, one that is the most directly stated destroyed life of a Pokemon by human hands. Sure, there are a number of Pokemon that are ruined indirectly, others that we messed up and then fixed, but this is really the only Pokemon we ruined from the beginning, and so horribly that it created a regional variant. This, as always, goes back to the tale of the Kitsune, with many different stories existing in time and many different kinds of Kitsune. What is just a myth or legend to us is a living, breathing creature for the people of Pokemon, as we have Zorua and Zoroark. Let's see if our words from our friends at yokai.com will remind you of anything about our Pokemon here. There are two major variations of Kitsune. Holy foxes are servants of the Shinto deity Inari, and Inari shrines are decorated with statues and images of these foxes. Legends tell of celestial foxes providing wisdom or service to good and pious humans. These holy foxes act as messengers of the gods and mediums between the celestial and human worlds. They often protect humans or places, provide good luck, and ward evil spirits away. More common are the wild foxes, which delight in mischief, pranks, or evil. There are stories in which wild foxes trick or even possess humans and cause them to behave strangely. Despite this wicked nature, even wild foxes keep their promises, remember friendships, and repay any favors done for them. Kitsune are extremely intelligent and powerful shape-shifters. They frequently harass humans by transforming into giants or other fearsome monsters. Sometimes they do this just for pranks, and sometimes they do it for more nefarious purposes. They are skilled enough to even transform into exact likenesses of individual people, often appearing in the guise of beautiful human women in order to trick young men. On more than one occasion, this has resulted in a marriage with an unwitting human. Some kitsune even spend most of their lives in human form, adopting human names and customs, taking human jobs, and even raising families. When startled or drunk or careless, a patch of their magical disguise can fail. The kitsune's true nature may be revealed by a tail, a swatch of fur, fangs, or some other vulpine feature. One of the most famous stories involving a kitsune is the tale of Tamamo no Mai. Tamamo no Mai was a beautiful woman who served the Japanese imperial court and was known for her intelligence and grace. However, it was later discovered that she was a fox in disguise, using her powers to influence the emperor. She fled when her true identity was revealed, but was eventually captured and punished, which that's kind of the softer Cliff Notes version of that story, because long story short, a second time, she legitimately gained status to be with the emperor, influenced him, and then had ultimately nearly caused the destruction of the entire empire. Even at her final moments, she did beg for mercy, but it stated that this was her final trick before her life was ended. There are in fact so many stories about kitsune that I could probably spend hours talking about them all. But what's important is to take all this info and realize that Zorua and Zoroark flat out have all of these abilities. Shape-shifting, their hair tuft looks like fire, which would stand out in the middle of the night. They are tricksters, and they're very, very rare. So when you have all of these stories that line up, of course you would have people ready to take up arms and push them out of their villages. The problem with this is that Zorua literally are just tricksters, who usually do absolutely nothing actually malicious, but rather only act in defense of themselves when necessary. This is shown time and time again in the Pokemon Zoroark movie, and I swear, that movie really made me like Zorua so much more, as the hype of the Pokemon originally flew right past me. The problem from here then is that people within the times of Hisui, a time when it was overall much colder, pushed any Zorua out of their villages and from the areas around those villages. They pushed them to the coldest parts of the region, where the Zorua were secluded and would die. And I have to say this every single time, this is not me exaggerating, this is not me playing up their story. The Dex entry states this, and the entirety of the Hisui and Snow miniseries shows this happening from the very beginning. The grief then from a passing child also then causes a normal Zoroark to transform into a grudge-filled Pokemon, becoming its Hisuian form, as its child is also revived as its own Hisuian form, both now partially ghosts. And actually, for the first time, or one of the few times, they are true ghosts, not just ghost-type Pokemon. And for the rest of their lives, they hate humanity. And over the many years to follow, humanity would lose their connection with Pokemon and forget that they were the ones that pushed these Pokemon to become the monsters that they are today. Even within the first episode of Hisui and Snow, the father of our main character flatly states that humans and Pokemon could never live together in harmony, going against everything that you and I have learned over the course of nearly 30 years of this franchise existing. But of course, within this older age, people within Hisui weren't coexisting with Pokemon yet, so it's understandable how fear made them separate from their natural connection with, well, nature. I do always like to think, though, that there is a silver lining to this one, and it's not just a thought, it's just fact, because we don't see Hisui and Zoroark in the modern day. After all, it is only created after having an intense grudge against humans. The reason why we don't see them anymore is simply because humanity was able to restore their bond with Hisui and Zorua and Zoroark, our main character befriending them and even being protected by them in that Hisui and Snow miniseries. It's the final flicker of a flame reignited, and even though a connection has been reforged, it still meant the extinction of an entire species of Pokemon. There are no Zorua or Zoroark in the modern day of Sinnoh. It's not because of the order of the games and when they were released. In fact, Zorua and Zoroark aren't even native to Unova, where we first meet them. They're a rare species that come from other lands like Paldea, Galar, and Kalos, the only places where they can be naturally encountered. The grass in the Trainer's School of Alola I personally don't really count, but if you really want to, I won't judge you for it. Which then does lead me to something new, because Sinnoh is inspired by Hokkaido, and they have the myth of the Kokuko, or the Black Fox, and I guarantee to you that this is the #1 inspiration for our Pokemon here. So let's visit our friends at yokai.com once more, shall we? Kokuko are rare kitsune who show themselves only during the reign of a peaceful leader. They have thick black fur and are slightly larger than other kitsune. They have from 1 to 9 tails depending on their age. Kokugo live in northern climates like Siberia and Hokkaido. They seldom appear in Japan south of the Tohoku region. Kokugo are one of the 5 families of Zenko. They have pure, good hearts and stand in contrast to Yako. In Onmyodo, Kokugo are associated with the cult of the North Star. They are said to be incarnations of the Big Dipper. They also serve Inari, although they are far less common than Bayako. Also, I know I'm saying a lot of names here. Don't worry about those right now. They're just other forms of Kitsune and positive or negative forms of them. But the Big Dipper part, I just realized while reading my script here, I think there's a big section of the Zoroark movie where they do stare at the night sky and they do see the Big Dipper or something similar to that. And if I'm wrong, then I won't be showing it on screen. If I am correct, it will be on screen right now, which would be really, really cool. But I'm not clipping this out because, I don't know, it's okay to be wrong. And you guys can always correct me, and I don't know, I don't mind being corrected. Back on track though, in 1771, the Lord of Hokkaido, Matsumai Michihiro, married a noblewoman from Kyoto. His bride was a devoted worshiper of Inari and frequently visited Inari shrines where kitsune made their homes. When she moved to be with her husband, many kitsune followed her. Unfortunately, she died soon after marrying. The kitsune who had accompanied her returned to Kyoto. One day, Michihiro's retainers went hunting in the mountains. They saw a rare black kitsune and shot it. Michihiro was pleased when they brought the creature back, but shortly after that, strange things began to happen. Michihiro offered the rare kitsune's meat as a present to one of his retainers. After eating it, the retainer became sick. He was immediately struck deaf. Death then soon followed. Michihiro had the fur of the kitsune hung out to dry. However, every night a kitsune appeared at the castle and demanded the skin be returned. When Michihiro heard of this, he refused. One morning after that, the skin was missing, torn off the drying frame. Then, local fishermen began complaining they could no longer catch herring. Michihiro was troubled. He believed the dead kitsune placed a curse on his domain. He consulted a temple and had the priest perform 100 nights of prayers for the kitsune. On the 99th night, the priest had a vision. A black kitsune appeared to him, explaining it was one of the kitsune who had came from Kyoto. It had made a family with a local kitsune and didn't return with the others. After being killed by Michihiro's retainers, it was unable to pass on. It remained as a vengeful spirit. It told that priest that if they would build a shrine, it could pass on and serve the area as a guardian spirit. The priest then told Michihiro what the kitsune had told him. Michihiro built an Inari shrine for the black kitsune nearby and enshrined it there. That shrine exists today. The Genko Inari Shrine inside the Kumano Shrine in Matsumai, Hokkaido. So then, if our stories line up as much as they seem to, then the Hisui, Zorua and Zoroark would be set to rest and pass on to the afterlife to never be seen again. Their species extinct within modern-day Sinnoh, but at least they now know peace and love, the things they were bereft of in their life. I genuinely cannot express how excited I was to read about the Kokuko the first time when I was digging through potential leads and inspirations. My videos are far from perfect, but each time I try to dig a little bit deeper, find new information every time, maybe something that is a little bit more in line with what the true inspiration or primary inspiration of a Pokemon is. Because I've talked about this Pokemon at least 5 times now, and I guarantee I'll talk about it again in the future. So in my eyes, I have to keep it interesting for those of you who have been here for a long time, and interesting for myself as well. Then again, I guess I don't know if you fully remember the things I've talked about unless you're binging my videos. Meanwhile, I can write the majority of Pokemon info off the top of my head at this point, so it feels like I just talked about Zorua just yesterday, even though it's been literal months. Onto lighter notes, while in the wild, Shelmets and Karablasts naturally cause each other to evolve, when we evolve them, I strongly believe we're actually horrible people. And I know, they both look incredibly cool, but it's time to face the music. Accelgor, now having lost its shell, has this to say from its Pokédex. When its body dries out, it weakens. So to prevent dehydration, it wraps itself in many layers of thin membrane. And according to Nintendo Dream Volume 201, we learn its pouting expression and crossed arms are due to it being miserable over having lost its shell. Like, yeah, we not only took away its protection, but that was also its home. We evicted it, dried it out, and are like, but dude, you look so freaking cool. Let's start you like a movie or something. And then proceed to continue pitting it against the Scavalier, who's just out there dual-wielding lances happily. We forced this snail into being a slug, and I'm surprised it can even become remotely happy at all at any point. As a final note to this quick story, I would also like to one day see new types of evolutions for these Pokemon. I think it'd be really cool to see a full knight armor battle snail and some sort of greater blue beetle. I don't really have anything for Carablast. On to the Pokemon that inspired me to make this video, Hydreigon. Its entire appearance is the fault of older generations within the world of Pokemon, and they make this very clear from the Pokédex. As from the Violet Dex we read, it's said that Hydreigon grew ferocious because people in times long past loathed it, considering it to be evil incarnate and attacking it relentlessly. Now, we have to ask two questions. Why would they attack it based on looks, and how did this affect Hydreigon? Well, I actually believe that the shiny version of Hydreigon may be the true original version of this Pokemon before it was pushed into the caves of the world. Think of it this way. When creatures live underground, they rely less on sunlight and they often lose pigmentation as there isn't any sun to activate their pigments anymore, to put it simply. And within Pokemon, we get to see a version of this through the Ultra Recon Squad, a group of people without sunlight living in a whole different world that have then evolved to have blue skin, just like our blue Hydreigon here. When we look at that shiny, assuming it was the original color, then it still has the red and black eyes, a sickly green color, and a rare purple coloration as well. None of this screams friendly at all to me, and it likely didn't scream friendly to anyone else in the past. So of course nobody thought until recently that Hydreigon might actually be a victim of humanity. After all, they, just as any other Pokemon, can be very docile and very friendly when trained properly, so it goes to show that maybe Hydreigon isn't as horrible as people say. The story likely then goes as follows. People, afraid of Hydreigon, hunt it down, push it out of their homes just as they did with Zorua. The only place where Dino and the rest of this line could go then is within the caves where nobody else would go. Maybe back then they didn't have their hair that was so long and covered their eyes, but as they evolved down in the caves, they would gain longer hair, unkempt with no reason to change it. They would live in the deep dark. The hair would cover their eyes, and over time the entire species would actually struggle to see overall as they rely less and less on eyesight. To prove this idea, we have Dex entries speaking on how Hydreigon and Noivern battle each other, but at night when Hydreigon can't see as well, Noivern absolutely dominates this three-headed dragon in battle. It doesn't rely on eyesight, and it's not adapted to be good at hunting at night. Something that you would expect of a creature living in the dark, but not of a creature that has been forced to live in the dark. Adding to this, Dino, Zweilous, and Hydreigon's voracious appetite comes from food scarcity. All creatures have dealt with food scarcity at some point in their evolutionary lives, with exception, of course, actually, and as a result, many creatures still gorge themselves on food when it is available. It's to fuel up their bodies. Even as humans, we, or rather our body's instinct, assume that this might be the only meal we get for the next week when we are eating. So the smartest thing is to eat everything that you can in the area and hope you survive to eat another meal in the future. There's not a lot of readily available food in caves unless you're drinking shrimp-filled water or eating invertebrates, which that was redundant, but I'm not taking that out of the script. And once again, their skin color would change from green or whatever color it was originally to this deeper blue color. Their eyes unaffected because, looking back at our parallel of the Ultra Recon Squad, we see that their eyes are also red. This isn't because their eyes are actually turning red, but just because the loss of pigmentation would allow red blood vessels to be more easily seen. Also, for clarification, which I should have said earlier, our skin would also not turn blue from living underground. That would just simply be Argyria, if I'm saying it correctly, if I remember properly, which is the excessive buildup of silver in the body, which itself is of course toxic. There was even a man who appeared on live TV and news who was the prime example of this. Realistically speaking, we would just lose most of our pigmentation by living underground, because skin color is literally just our body's response to generations of living in the sun, more or less than others. What's wild though is that just like Zorua, Hydreigon likely had stories told about it that would follow classic myths in our world, but serve as cautionary tales in Pokemon's world. The greatest example of which is what we know it is inspired by, primarily Yamato no Orochi. One more time from yokai.com, Yamato no Orochi is a gigantic serpent with 8 heads and 8 tails. It has bright red eyes and a red belly. The beast is so large that its body covers the distance of 8 valleys and 8 hills. Fir and cypress trees grow on its back, and its body is covered in moss. The tale that would be spread is that this legendary creature would ask for a couple's daughter as a sacrifice, demanding rather. Once having 8, now this couple only have 1 daughter left, and without sacrifice, all would be destroyed. The solution came up with by the legend by the name of Susanoo, the storm god who had approached this couple by accident, was to create powerful sake in massive vats that would be irresistible. When Yamato no Orochi appeared, the great serpent slithered into the fence and noticed the powerful sake. It dipped its 8 heads into the 8 vats and drank the alcohol. Soon, the monster fell into a deep, drunken sleep. Susanoo used this chance to make his attack. He sliced the enormous beast into tiny pieces with his sword. The carnage was so great that the He River flowed with blood. When Susanoo had cut the creature down to its 4th tail, his sword shattered into pieces. Examining the part of Yamato no Orochi's tail which broke his sword, Susanoo discovered another sword within the creature's flesh, the legendary katana Murakumo, later known as Kusanagi. Otherwise, it is currently, in full name, Murakumo no Tsurugi. Now, Susanoo eventually offered Murakumo as a gift to his sister Materasu, the sun goddess, and was allowed to return to heaven, where he had been originally banished from. The sword was passed down through the generations in the imperial line of Japan, and it is one of the 3 pieces of imperial regalia, along with the mirror Yata no Kagami and the jewel Yasakani no Magatama. Today, the sword, which came from Yamato no Orochi's tail, is said to be safeguarded in the Atsuta Shrine in Nagoya. Those 3 regalia, by the way, are the exact inspirations for Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf. Though there's no greater lore connection between the Lake Guardians and Hydreigon, it is at least fun to let you know about these connections that could exist in the future of this franchise. Once again, maybe in another world, in another time, we would find that Hydreigon isn't mistreated and pushed into isolation within caves, giving us a very different appearance, a different behavior, and likely a dragon without the dark typing. There is nothing anyone could do to convince me that the Galar Fossils weren't ruined by us and forced to suffer in a form of existence that should have never even been possible in the first place. But of course, these were inspired by the Bone Wars, and I actually dug up, it was really fun to dig up an old conversation I had with Steve Versati, American paleontologist and writer of The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs and consultant for Jurassic World. I'd reached out long ago asking him info I wanted to pick his brain about from when I made my very first fossil Pokemon video after reading his book that I just said, and I brought up these monstrosities, right? And even while he was out in the field, he was kind enough to respond, saying the following. Elasmosaurus is a famous case. During the infamous Bone Wars competition between the paleontologists Cope and Marsh, they were in such a rush to describe new fossil species that their work was often sloppy. It was true. In one of the first descriptions of these long-necked plesiosaurs, the head was put at the end of the tail by accident. There are other similar cases, like when the fossil whale Basilosaurus was first found and thought to be a reptile, and maybe most famous of all, when the dinosaur Iguanodon was first found, the big fossil spike was put on its nose, whereas now we know it was a thumb spike. Stuff like this happens when we first find a totally new fossil, if we've never seen the animal before, and it's weird, it's understandable how we don't know how all of the bones fit together at first. Now, the problem from here then within Pokemon is that within Galar, we find that Karalis and her assistants take this one step further, and upon reconstructing these fossils, bring them back to life. They literally should not be alive, they should not exist because they never existed before their quote-unquote reincarnation. And yet, here they are, alive right in front of us. Dracozolt is misproportioned. Arctozolt moves incredibly slowly. The face of Arctofish is completely messed up as its head is actually pointing upwards, making hunting and swallowing prey very difficult. And then the worst of them all, Dracovish. If we just ignore the internal organ issue of whatever the heck is happening here, right? It is literally a head put on the end of a tail, just as Brasadi stated with the Elasmosaurus. It can run at incredible speeds, 40 miles per hour or 60 kilometers an hour, but it literally cannot breathe unless it is underwater. I love this goofy Pokemon, but the closer you look at it, the more cursed it gets, and it is forced to constantly run around on land, even though it can run just as fast, if not probably faster, underwater, because it's actually getting enough oxygen provided to its body while it's down there filtering in oxygen, which I'm actually now imagining it like a shark, where as long as it moves, it's able to filter oxygen from the water. But to be entirely fair, it is most like the Dunkleosteus, a creature with such an incredible jaw that it could just simply open up its mouth and the displacement of water and natural suction would just drag fish into its mouth. Also, that is more specifically the Dunkel for the head of this thing, not the tail, which I think is, I don't have it in front of me. You do. Editing Acrylic can correct me if I'm wrong. It's warm in here. I need water. I need caffeine. Anywho, it's also the primary example of where the theory of understanding the size of fish comes from. And long story short of that is that they thought this dude, the Dunkleosteus, was massive. I mean, huge! 4 or 5 times larger than it actually is. And now they've been following the theory that has been proven so far that fish with long heads have long bodies, and fish with short heads have short bodies. Dunkel here has a short head, so it has a short body, but it's still, a pretty big creature. And yes, just for the few people who might ask me, I have watched Lindsay Nicole, though I need to listen to more of her videos because they're just golden. Her Paleozoic era compilation is actually one of the major inspirations for that first fossil Pokemon video as well. On to Genesect, who is a much shorter and sadder entry overall in part, as with the majority of our mythical Pokemon, you will not learn their true stories without enjoying other parts of Pokemon media, whether that be movies or YouTube shorts that the company releases, and not like the vertical YouTube shorts, I mean like Poketoons and stuff like that. In the case of Genesect, it was not only revived by Team Plasma from a fossil and fitted with super robotic lasers and body parts, but it was also revived with memories of its old life. As it turns out, within the Genesect movie, they do remember the old world that they used to live in, and when they escape the Team Plasma facility, they go on a massive search for it. Unfortunately, all they find is a barren land, devoid of life. Only snow is there then to greet them, cold and harsh, just as their new skin is. And in response to this, their leader becomes enraged, while the rest follows its orders against their wills. Now it sees everyone as an enemy, having the rest of its family follow suit as they work to transform modern-day cities into their nests once again, while absorbing power from a massive generator. Honestly, this might not even be entirely humanity's fault. It could just be the way the world changed naturally over hundreds of millions of years, considering that Genesect would be from the Paleozoic era, since it is stated to be the Paleozoic Pokemon, which more specifically, it would have existed in the Carboniferous period, where we find insects and arthropods with much larger body sizes due to how they process oxygen. And just to answer your other question, no, we would not have been massive in case you thought that for even a second. We'd be roughly the same size as we are now, if not smaller, I'd argue, and be dealing with 2.5 foot long dragonflies and 6 foot millipedes. I don't think my arm span is even 6 foot, just to give you an idea, which would not work out very well for us, I gotta say. The real crime here, though, is just that Team Plasma has brought back this Pokemon to life and has caused incredible emotional damage while forcing Genesect under their thumb. Pretty cruel practice, but what else do you expect from the evil side of Team Plasma? Alright, I know I just released a video in the past week or so all about the original dragon, which you should check out, but I do believe we ruined its life to some degree. In short, it was once a singular dragon encompassing the entirety of truths and ideals while being connected to the infinite energy and power of the universe through dreams. And just because humans decided they would like to fight over the ideas of truths or ideals being better, the dragon itself was no longer believed in, it was weakened, and it split into Reshiram, Zekrom, and Kyurem. This wouldn't be the only time that humanity's belief, or lack thereof, changed the powers of entire Pokemon or their forms. After all, the same has happened to Calyrex, who lost its powers, Zygarde, who gained a Mega form, and Rayquaza, who also gained a Mega form itself. But again, keeping it short, I can let you watch the video all about that if you want to learn more, as I'm excited about our finale. In one version of 3, regarding our story of Ultra Necrozma, it was actually attacked by the ancestors of the people who lived in Ultra Megalopolis. The synopsis is as follows. Necrozma gave off a vast amount of light that was enough to illuminate all of Ultra Space. The ancestors of humans living in Ultra Megalopolis decided to use their scientists to gain control of the Prism Pokemon and attacked it. The battle caused Necrozma to lose a part of its body. When it attempted to heal, light would leak from its wound, and Necrozma consumed all of the light in Ultra Space from its attempts. The ancestors of Ultra Megalopolis then built Megalo Tower and managed to gain control of Necrozma with the help of artificial light. Necrozma and the ancestors then realized that in order for the Prism Pokemon to heal itself, it would need to fuse with the incarnations of the Sun and Moon and absorb their light energy. In other canons of the story, we find that Ultra Necrozma saved the home of Naganadel from a great meteor in the anime, just like Arceus did in the movies. And then in the games, it seems to have just run out of energy one day. The only way to properly heal and restore it in any of these canons is actually by using an equal amount of power between Solgaleo and Lunala without having them fuse to it permanently, and instead just fill it with both the light of the sun and the light of the moon. Otherwise, it will just continue to steal light from any place that it visits until the end of existence. All because none of the light that exists in our world or any of the universes collectively currently will ever be enough to bring it back to Ultra Necrozma. As a final note, I genuinely cannot express to you just how much cooler the manga is compared to every other piece of media for Pokemon. I have the entire first 7 volumes completely covered through the Red and Yellow Saga videos. I genuinely need to cover the rest of the series as a whole in the future. For example, just to hype you up just a little bit, just getting to see how Zygarde in the games just kind of got to exist in Alola, but in the manga we get to see it go toe-to-toe with Ultra Necrozma and other Ultra Beasts, or even getting to see Lusamine boss it out with Ultra Beasts at her side after disappearing for 6 months. Are these spoilers? Sure, but the details and story leading up to these points are what make them incredibly special, and I need more people to be interested in the manga for my own sake, right? Expect a few dedicated videos in the future. I've been reading volumes bit by bit and need more people to just experience this with me. But for now, it's wild to consider the universe where another version of humanity had actually attacked Ultra Necrozma for its light. And it's something that is canonical. There are canonically multiple universes that exist within Pokemon. We've seen that through Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, through the Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun Ultra Moon games, and so much more. It's something that actually, when we look at this event, fits incredibly well within the general lore of Pokemon, with people like Giovanni abusing Pokemon for profit, the Devon Corporation and C. Mauville doing the same but undercover, and so many other examples. I just wish we were able to experience the Ultra Necrozma / Zygarde event and so much more in the games properly, and that the manga wasn't just so hard for people to get their hands on. Just imagine how anyone who says the manga and anime aren't canon at all, but at the same time the first experience of some people through Pokemon was the anime or was the manga because the games were less accessible, meaning that that is the primary canon for those people, and I think that's what makes it that much more special. They're all, by the way, produced by the same company. They're all just alternate ways to tell similar stories with the same core themes, and that's what I love. But I'm gonna stop myself before I continue to ramble. That is all for today, and I want to say thank you for watching. I definitely think I'll be gearing up for a longer video soon because there's been quite a few videos under an hour lately, and I'm just thinking about what ecology-based idea I really want to sink my teeth into and go whole hog every single detail possible and have fun with it even more than usual. I also want to thank members of the channel. They ensure I can take this time to deep dive into topics and make quality content for everyone. If you want behind the scenes info, early access to videos, and members exclusive videos like this list here, Yeah, that's the right direction. Become a member for as little as $3 a month. It makes a massive difference. Let me also know if there's any Pokemon I missed. I thought about Pokemon such as Alolan Meowth due to royalty inbreeding it, or Silvally and Mewtwo, but their lives were more about abuse than it was them already existing and us ruining them, as humanity created them in the first place and then they broke free from oppression. Maybe I'm just being too strict on my definition, but again, let me know in the comments. I enjoy reading your comments, plus they appease the almighty algorithm alongside likes and hyping the video, so make sure you do that right now. It boosts the video. Lastly, one of my favorite comments from this past week is from Jose on a short of mine about Sock, saying, the best way to fix Sock and Throw. They're training dummies that have decades of martial arts damage, but also received just as much love, care, and dedication from their respective owners that they then became alive. A fighting type version of Banette's evil abandonment, a dummy that became alive from passion, discipline, and fighting spirit, which I thought that was really dope. It's really unique. It gets into the idea of like staying away from the very twisted and dark things that a lot of people come up with, which is cool sometimes, but also taking something where, again, we talked about earlier, objects that are treated a certain way coming to life as yokai, and in this exact case, well, we have that. They were loved and treated with care, even though they were training dummies, and now they're still a benevolent fighting type. It's just really a great way to enhance a Pokemon altogether that's otherwise very underwhelming, minus the, Sock being able to cleave a whole ocean in half with a single hit, but I'm not going to get into that, and that truly is all for today. So as always, thank you so much for watching. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. Don't do anything I would do. Please be nice to each other. I love you, and I'll see you next time.